quitting?
Does that mean you want to go back in part-time? I see.
It was fun.
Good.
Yeah, you sure picked the right weekend to go. Okay, welcome to First Universalist of New Madison. On this, geez, it doesn't seem like January day at all. Rainy, misty, muddy. We were just talking, I was telling everybody how much I hate mud, because Curly is making my little tiny lot looks like a big giant mud hole. So I've been taking gravel from my one parking lot, scooping up 5-gallon buckets of gravel and bringing it up, so at least I have a path to walk up and down. But I can't gravel the whole thing, so if anybody has any neat ideas on how to get rid of mud, let me know. All right, do we have any announcements? Yes.
Thank you for the card. It made me feel not alone.
You're more than welcome. And I don't know, did I put that on the card? We don't care what you look like. You're always welcome at church. You know, if you're bruised or battered or missing pieces or parts. Well, that's what Dolly said. But we just want to encourage you, and that was the same thing. We sent a card to Margaret when they were sick and told Patrick, you know, he's only been here the once that I can remember for a long time. So just because you came and we made you sick, that's no reason not to come again. You're always welcome here no matter what. Okay, we're doing La Pieta, the movement in Chicago. Roberta has that had prepared for last week, and because of the weather, she wasn't able to get here. In fact, most people weren't able to get here. So we're going to do that again. I do have some different pictures and different things to put in that because I went ahead and kind of ad-libbed it last week. So I did the presentation that I had, but this is a different presentation. So if you saw it last week, it'll still be different than it was last week, but basically the same topic. And we're still talking about Michelangelo, who was a pretty titanic, pretty amazing force in art. Amazingly, he was a writer. He wrote poetry. He painted the Sistine Chapel. Pretty much all around. Any other announcements? Let's see, I don't think there's anything church-wise. We had the movie night with Lincoln. I think that the people that were there, I think, enjoyed it. The next one will be probably next month in February, toward the end of February. We haven't nailed it down yet because I have to talk to Margaret. We're going to do the Holocaust. If you've been watching on PBS, the Holocaust series, there's 3 of those. Plus, PBS has been running because of the anniversary of the Holocaust. There's one show on PBS called Treblinka, which was a pretty amazing and moving presentation on PBS. Plus there's been a couple more, so what we'll try and do is filter those together and get just like one presentation. And once again, there'll be, you can bring whatever you want, but there'll be like pizza and pop. And actually probably be beer there if Chaz is there. And I'll bring beer the next time too. So you're all welcome to come to that, whether you come to church or not. That's open for everybody. Okay, the prelude will be in the garden. Sounds of music. That was in the garden, which some of us are already thinking about gardens. I bought some lettuce seeds and some radish seeds, so I may be starting them pretty quick. I've got a grow light this year, so we'll see what happens. The chalice lighting is Lighting on Thresholds by Florence Caplow. We kindle this flame, honoring the doorways in our souls, the windows through which we gaze at one another, the balconies where we catch a glimpse of the sky, the thresholds we stand on this morning, wondering, hoping, fearing, dreaming. Our opening hymn is 112, Do You Hear? Mine and theirs, do you hear, do you hear? And we try to be aware and listening here. Okay, our affirmation is Across the Distance by Laura Thompson. Across the distance, the light from within me shines, sending love to all. Across the distance, your light is fuel that warms me and helps to keep my own light burning. Together, we keep the flame of community burning bright. And we keep talking about community, and that is what we are trying to keep burning bright. Okay, this is a statue La Pieta, as Michelangelo did it as a very young man. It surprised everyone. His father wanted him to be a doctor, a lawyer, the standard thing when you come from a rich family, a professional person. But Michelangelo felt the need to be an artist, and he basically blossomed in every sphere possible. So La Pieta is the Virgin Mary holding the body of Christ after the crucifixion. And I'll give you a little background. This is the church where the La Pieta was in Chicago, and this is what Roberta will be talking about. And I'll show these pictures again. And this is the process of moving it. This is, they are still, people who want to keep that church are still worshiping there. But let's go to the children's story, which is another one of Michelangelo. We'll see if it'll play. I tried this earlier and it's kind of slow, so we'll see if it comes through.
When we think of classic works of art, the most common setting we imagine them in is a museum. But what we often forget is that much of this art was not produced with a museum setting in mind. What happens to an artwork when it's taken out of its originally intended context. Take the example of Michelangelo's statue of David, depicting the boy hero who slew the giant Philistine Goliath, armed with only his courage and his slingshot. When Michelangelo began carving a block of pure white marble to communicate this famous biblical story, the city of Florence intended to place the finished product atop their grand cathedral. Not only would the 17-foot-tall statue be easily visible at this height, but its placement alongside 11 other statues of Old Testament heroes towering over onlookers would have a powerful religious significance, forcing the viewer to stare in awe towards the heavens. But by the time Michelangelo had finished the work in 1504, the plans for the other statues had fallen through, and the city realized that lifting such a large sculpture to the roof would be more difficult than they had thought. Furthermore, the statue was so detailed and lifelike, down to the bulging veins in David's arm and the determination on his face, that it seemed a shame to hide it so far from the viewer. A council of politicians and artists convened to decide on a new location for the statue, ultimately voting to place it in front of the Palazzo della Signoria, the town hall and home of the new Republican government. This new location transformed the statue's meaning. The Medici family, who for generations had ruled the city through their control of banking, had recently been exiled, and Florence now saw itself as a free city threatened on all sides by wealthy and powerful rivals. David, now the symbol of heroic resistance against overwhelming odds, was placed with his intense stare, now a look of stern warning focused directly towards Rome, the home of Cardinal Giovanni de' Medici. Though the statue itself had not been altered, its placement changed nearly every aspect of it, from a religious to a political significance. Though a replica of David still appears at the Palazzo, the original statue was moved in 1873 to the Galleria dell'Accademia, where it remains today. In the orderly, quiet environment of the museum, alongside numerous half-finished Michelangelo sculptures, overt religious and political interpretations fall away, giving way to detached contemplation of Michelangelo's artistic and technical skill. But even here, the astute viewer may notice that David's head and hand appear disproportionately large, a reminder that they were made to be viewed from below. So, not only does context change the meaning and interpretation of an artwork throughout its history, sometimes it can make that history resurface in the most unexpected ways.
Context is everything. And this is what we'll be talking about with Roberta and the movement of the La Pieta from one church to another in Chicago. We'll go over that. All right, joys and concerns. Let's start with a moment of silence to kind of think about what we are going to hear. Margaret contacted us this week. I think she's well. She didn't say anything about being sick or Patrick being sick, but she wanted us to light a candle for her Aunt Dolores, who died in Dallas, Texas at the age of 99 and a half. Evidently she was very close to Dolores, so we're lighting a candle for Dolores and Dolores' family and for Margaret and Patrick. She was hoping to be here today. Obviously that didn't happen, so wherever she is. And I know she doesn't watch Facebook, so maybe she'll see it on YouTube. But the candle will be lit nonetheless. Any other joys and concerns? As is usual, we have our sunflowers for the Ukraine. No real change there. The Russians continue to send 40 to 50 missiles almost every day. And the Ukrainians tend to shoot down or are usually shooting down 50 or 60, 70, even 80%. But it only takes 10 or 12 missiles to destroy an entire building and kill 10 to 20 to 30 people at one fell swoop. The last one was the building that was destroyed, and I forget the name of the town, but they said the missile that the Russians sent was an anti-ship missile, a missile intended to go across the ocean and blow up an aircraft carrier or a battleship. So it sounds like they're scraping the bottom of the barrel and they're throwing everything they got at it. So we'll just have to see what happens. The thing to note right now is with the new Congress in session, some of the people who are now leading in the House of Representatives are, I don't know whether they are active supporters of Russia or they just don't like the Ukraine, but they want to cut the funding to Ukraine. That is the only thing that is keeping Ukraine going now, is support from the other nations of the world. That little country doesn't have the money or the material to fight the entire Russian army, but they are fighting them to a standstill and even gaining on the Russian army due to the supplies and the material and the information that the United States and NATO and other countries are providing. And that's the latest word is now the modern battle tanks will be supplied to the Ukrainians. So we'll see how that tips the balance with what's going on. So, I can't
Those
Yes.
Abrams tanks that we're sending over are made in Lima, Ohio.
Yes. And
That's where Ken worked a couple of years
the tank
ago.
factory. And that's something that people don't realize, and that's something that I don't know that may sway the conservative members of Congress. When we send material, we don't send much money to Ukraine, we send supplies, we send ammunition, we send tanks. That basically is boosting our economy. What we're doing is buying tanks from ourselves and then giving them away. And that's been a constant thing when people say the economy is in bad shape. Let's have a war, because what does a war do? It takes millions of dollars and just throws it away and blows it up into nothing. So you don't have to prove that you built a new highway. You don't have to prove you built a new building. You just buy all this stuff and throw it away, and everybody has a job. Everybody gets paid. The capitalist that owns the company gets rich, and everybody seems to benefit, which is why the only thing that all these conservatives agree on is we need to have a big defense budget. They just don't agree with where it should go. So, and that's, I just found out, I don't know, like Mike knows about this, the Capital Journal. There's a website that's talking about Ohio that I've gotten listed on. I'm going to start bringing that to your attention. As you might know, the ex-president of the Senate, what was his name, was arrested for, what is it, Huffman? Householder, yes. Got millions of dollars from First Energy to support two money-losing coal-burning energy plants and a nuclear energy plant. And it's not so bad that they just gave them the money from the state budget, but they also raised every Ohioan that pays taxes. Their taxes went up to support this private company, to support something that's uneconomical. When people tell you nuclear energy or coal, and what happened was when natural gas came along and the price of gas was cheaper than coal, the company was losing money because they generated their electricity with coal. So now this householder is under indictment and got millions of dollars and then spread it around and got his people elected. The other thing they mentioned was Maureen O'Connor. Maybe any of you familiar with her? She was the Republican Chief Justice who just retired. She was the one person who kept pushing the reapportionment and trying to stop the gerrymandering in Ohio's in voting districts. She is now out, and the entire Supreme Court is controlled by conservative Republicans, which means there's a very scary time coming up where it doesn't matter basically what you vote. The party has arranged it so they will win all the time no matter what. So we're not sure exactly what's going to happen there. But with the First Capital Journal, I will be bringing you updates as an important addendum to what it is to be a citizen and what you need to be aware of. Sometimes you can't do anything, but at least we want to be aware of it. All right, so basically, we'll light a candle for the state of Ohio, the state, quote unquote, state of Ohio, and the condition or the state of Ohio. And one more candle for those joys and concerns which we've not been able to voice, and probably for those of you who don't want to hear me voice this concern over and over again, I'll light a candle for you. All right. The message is with Roberta, Pieta. Let's see. Which picture do you want to have up, Roberta?
It doesn't matter.
Let's do the one that the original church. This is the Pieta in the original church where it is, and it's being moved. This is an article from the New York Times, correct?
Yes.
I love this article. and the writing is very small.
But you have light now, thanks to Chaz.
Yes, I've got light now, and that really, really helps. Thank you. This is going to be a battle over religious statue. It's more about statue than religion. And we will be in Chicago while we're thinking about this. It says why we're here. We're exploring how America defines itself one place at a time. 2 communities in Chicago have seen the future tied to the fate of a beloved religious statue. So, we're in Chicago. On a cold Tuesday morning in Chicago, police officers lined an alley on the west side. Across a chain-link fence, a group of people in parkas paced nervously in a backyard. Then the officers stepped aside. A 3-ton statue wrapped in blue cloth was loaded from the vacant St. Adelbert Church onto the bed of a truck, beginning its slow journey down the alley. Even shrouded in blankets, the statue had a lifelike quality. It was a replica still visible in silhouette of Michelangelo's Pieta. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing the words correctly, but hang on. The statue they were moving was a silhouette of Michelangelo's Pieta, the marble figure of Mary cradling the body of Jesus. "Don't take her away," shouted Judy Vasquez, one of the people in the backyard, as the statue passed by. "Hallelujah," said another protester, clutching a rosary of brown wooden beads and raising her fist in anger. For more than 5 years, a group of Polish and Latino Catholics from Chicago and its suburbs has been waging a fierce but quixotic fight against the Archdiocese. They're waging a war against the Archdiocese of Chicago. They first objected to the closure in 2019 of St. Adelbert Church, a towering brick structure in the Pilsen neighborhood, part of a wave of parish consolidations tied to a shrinking attendance and the exorbitant cost of repairing antiquated buildings. Then the same group turned its efforts to the statue inside, which was slated to be moved to another Catholic parish, St. Paul, a mile away. And this is a big statue. Their mission with the statue was about more than the statue. For the Polish members of the group, the church and the statue were monuments to their ancestors and a reminder of their ties to Pilsen, which was once an entry point in Chicago for Polish immigrants. For the Latinos, the fight was to preserve community anchors, including churches, as the neighborhood becomes increasingly gentrified and working-class Mexican families are forced out by the raising rents. If they still sell the property of St. Adelbert's, it's going to change the fabric of Pilsen, Ms. Vasquez says. This is unacceptable that they want to sell every piece of church property to developers. The developers will have carte blanche. They're going to continue to develop Pilsen. They'll take the culture away from our neighborhoods. The Archdiocese of Chicago says the changes reflect reality. The number of weekend churchgoers at St. Adelbert had shrunken to about 200, far less than is needed to sustain a church of that size. And the building required millions of dollars in repairs because of its crumbling brick facade, a decades-old problem that was explained in detail to parishioners before St. Adelbert Church merged with a neighboring parish. Moving the statue to that parish, also in Pilsen, will give the beloved Pieta a home, the Archdiocese said, a place where it can be protected and preserved for the community. We understand that change is difficult, and many have worshiped at St. Adelbert or have family history with that church. Manuel Gonzalez, a spokesman for the Archdiocese, said in an email, "We truly hope the small number of former St. Adelbert parishioners who are among the protesters will join with their neighbors to help the unification succeed." I watched the protesters, now the person writing this, it wasn't me. I watched the protesters one morning in November as they gathered for one of their regular prayer sessions in the alley. They drank coffee, shared memories of the church, and prayed the rosary with their eyes lowered. Most of the group carried memories of what St. Adelbert was like more than a half century ago, when it was a thriving parish with a school and a vast convent that was home to dozens of nuns who apparently are no longer in the church there. The alderman who represents Pilsen on the Chicago City Council stood among the prayer group, recalling the history of the church and a multicultural effort to save it. In front of St. Adelbert, a sign still notes a mass schedule with separate services in both Polish and Spanish. Both communities are trying to save St. Adelbert. It's a sacred and important site for both communities. Mr. Lopez had pushed for a zoning change that would give the community more input into the fate of the church building, should it be sold. The objective is to find somebody that could repurpose the building, a member of the Finance Council at St. Paul had said. That's been the difficulty because obviously nobody, including us, wants the building torn down. It's a beautiful structure. On the day of the statue's removal, Ms. Vasquez and her group would not let it leave without a fight. For weeks, they had waited anxiously, knowing that it could be moved at any time. Then Ms. Vasquez heard on the Tuesday after Thanksgiving that crews had arrived at the church. Members of the group raced over and stood in the background, watching for hours as workers took the huge statue out of the church and loaded it onto a truck. Couldn't you just see that happening and everybody watching? Somebody reminisced about baptisms and weddings at St. Adelbert, saying that the building was more than a parish, a repository of vital Polish history. Polish people built this church, he said. He had long since left his home in the old neighborhood for the suburbs, he said. But he was bitter about the slow dismantling of a parish he loved. After workers removed the statue, the truck turned into the street in front of the church, headed toward St. Paul. Ms. Vasquez and several other protesters positioned themselves in front of the truck, locking arms and refusing to move. Jose Delgado, who lives across the street, emerged from his house and shook his head at the commotion. The church is a lost cause. The statue is a lost cause. And it's been a lost cause for years, said Mr. Delgado, who regularly had attended St. Adelbert. After an extended standoff, police officers arrested the protesters, and the statue continued its journey to St. Paul Church. 1 week later, the Reverend Michael Enright, the pastor at St. Paul, opened the door of the rectory into the darkened, silent church. There was the statue, cut from Carrara marble in its new perch in front of Gothic arches and stained glass windows. He declined to comment on the conflict over the statue. The protest group has been angry with him for years over the closing of St. Adelbert. But he is now the statue's caretaker of sorts, and an unusually qualified one. He happens to be a hobbyist stonecutter who has carved pieces in the church, including a lectern in the stands on the altar. When the Pieta arrived at St. Paul in November, it was covered in dust and dirt from the move. Father Enright carefully vacuumed the debris and wiped the statue with paper towels. Standing before the marble form of Mary and Jesus, he said he could see why it had inspired such passion and devotion. There is something to be said for beauty, he said. Ms. Vasquez could not bring herself to attend Mass at St. Paul, but she has visited the statue twice in its new home, she said last week. She was popping in and saying a prayer about all the activity that is going on there. I was just talking to her, being the statue. I was just talking to her, giving her my pain, saying Ave Maria, Ms. Vasquez said. I just had to be by her. Okay, and I have pictures. I think Tim had put something on there.
Some of the pictures from the newspaper article that's one of them. It's on the screen now.
Yeah.
A couple more.
And so if any of you are interested in all this, there are the pictures and the writing. Are there any comments about this church? Not this church, this church.
It's interesting, isn't it, how the article ended with someone deeply conflicted, angry, emotional, would return to this particular work for calmness, despite the fact that the opposition is moving it. So that attests to, even though it may be a reproduction of Michelangelo's original work, it attests to the power of art, and particularly religious art.
Religious art, yes. Well, and the church where the statue, is that what I'm calling it?
Yes.
The church where it was first placed had been closed, and so they moved it to this other church, and now the parishioners from the closed church are going in to look at the statue, but not to attend service.
But they won't go to church. And did you notice the other gentleman who had attended there and lived there, and now he's moved out into the suburbs, and he's mad that they're closing the church, but he's not supporting the church,
No.
and he's not going to the church. So that kind of gives you the context, which we talked about before, how important context is. And I thought it was also a little humorous. They closed the church because they only had 200 people in attendance. Give me a break. I'd give my left arm for 200 people in attendance.
It takes more than 200 to support that big church.
Yes, and that's the reason they closed the church. So.
But if any of you want to see it.
I'll show you I've got some more pictures, and I'll show you the other pictures.
But think of the emotions that surround the closing of different things that we have in our own community.
Yeah.
The demolition of the Westmont school building in Hollinsburg. Okay, the preservation and the sigh of relief of the school in Palestine. Okay? If you will, the sincere attempts to, and Roberta can probably speak to this more, the preservation of the school building in the Gettysburg. And you see that in the same way with the demolition of the church that I attended after its 100th anniversary. I wasn't there all 100 years. That was in Savona, Ohio. And the church moved, first was here in New Madison. And there were many of those people that went to that church that said, good luck, we'll miss the church, but they never attended New Madison.
Yep.
So those kinds of emotions are, I guess, we've all experienced. But this particular one, okay, I don't know, a sign of the times, if you will, it's just a mile away. But it was something dear to their heart, and certainly, as any masterpiece of art will do, evoked a good number of emotions.
Speaking of Gettysburg School, it still stands. I graduated there years ago, and the school was closed, and people in the town of Gettysburg tried to use it for different things, and it didn't work. So this building is standing there, empty, of course, and you wonder what's
A lot of them are turned into, a lot of old hotels are turned into places for people who need subsidized housing for the either disability or older people. I know of 2 or 3 schools in towns around here that some developer has purchased and turned all those rooms into actual apartments for people, and they've been very successful with that. So,
Eaton, Ohio, Camden, Ohio.
yes,
2 very close.
West Milton, there's one in West Milton. Yes, so that's always a possibility, but there are people who always want, they stick with the context, they want to remember, they have their memories, and their memories are important to them. But that's what we talk about, the greatest good for the greatest number. What is the best value for something, and to use your brain to try and kind of tuss out what's the important part and what's the value in it. And sometimes to keep something just for memory's sake is not a very good value. If you can transform it into something that helps other people, but it's hard to get people that's not in my backyard thing. You know, people don't want housing for unmarried, unwed women, or for people, halfway houses for people being released from prison. These are all good uses for the public, to save the public money, or homeless people, someplace for homeless people to stay. They don't want to give their money for that, and they don't want to see it in their backyard. So another thing that I'll throw in now, because we got a little bit of time, Dolly mentioned to me that in her travels all over the world, she saw a church in Rome where there was a statue of Moses. And the interesting thing was Moses had horns. Can you see the picture? This is a large picture, but this is the picture here. The colloquial reason, or the reason that was passed around from person to person, was that the reason that anybody had horns in the early sculptures was because they were Jewish, and that was an anathema to the Christian sculptors and the Christian people who sponsored the sculptures. So they wanted the people to know that they were Jewish. I did a little bit of research on that, and I think that's more of a kind of a racist thing that people just come up with off the back of their hand. The reason was St. Jerome was the one who translated the Sumerian and the Greek into Latin, or what they call the Vulgate, and he mistranslated. The original Greek talks about rays of light emanating from the head of the holy people of Moses when he came down from the mountain. There were rays of light emanating from his head. He turned rays of light into horns. So then the translation said horns, and then everybody who was depicting it in paintings or sculptures, well, it says Moses has horns, so Michelangelo, this is a Michelangelo sculpture. Put horns on Moses' head. And the horns are still there. So,
Lost in translation.
yes, altered translation. So, what I want to remind you of over and over again is use your common sense. Don't always take the first reason that's given to you, the reason something is done. And look for something that makes a little more sense. Take the value, and that's what we try to teach. We try to teach it in school, and that's being shut off all over the place, is intellectual discussion and a value judgment of to weigh the scientific importance of what you're deciding. I can't even remember what that's called now. What do they call the process, the scientific process of making a good decision? Whatever, I'll think of it later. Yeah, deductive or inductive, or there's a like rational reasoning. It's using your reason, and that's what we try to teach kids, or tell them we're trying to teach them, is to use reasoning to come to the right answer. Don't always take something you see in Facebook as gospel, like they hated Jews, so they put horns on their head. Use your reasoning powers and go through and figure that out. The same thing applies to everything else that we're doing.
I always use the word common sense. That's just something that I use.
And
I have something tossing me out. What's common
the
sense?
sad thing is, the people who manipulate people will tell you it's common sense. They will tell you it's simple reasoning. They'll tell you it's what God intended. They always have a rationale for what they want you to believe. But if you look a little deeper, there's something else I can tell you. In doing a little bit of research on Pieta, one of the websites that was speaking against it, it had a very innocuous name like, Preserve Pieta or whatever. Then it turned out, the longer I went into it, they started throwing in anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish phrases. They started throwing in anti-LGBTQ phrases. And then they were talking about the reason they wanted the church preserved is there was a developer who was buying old churches and turning them into entertainment venues, basically with exotic dancers. And he'd done this to numerous other churches. And I'm thinking, you mean somebody's buying a Catholic cathedral and putting strippers in it? And I did a little more research on that. It turns out that's never been done. But this person that's writing this website is trying to get people excited. He's trying to get these people in the neighborhood, oh, you can't let this church go because it's going to have filthy activities going on there, you know, immoral activities. Well, I mean, that is possible. It depends on who buys the church. But the most likely thing is, and what most people are afraid of, is a developer will buy the church, tear it down, and build a 20-story apartment building and make billions of dollars out of it. Because the city doesn't want to have an abandoned church standing there. So you have to use your common sense and sometimes look a little deeper into the things that you're seeing. Don't take the first thing, because this website made perfect sense on the surface, but the farther I went into it, the more suspicious it got. And if you keep your antenna up, you can see that for yourself. Okay, offering. As is usual, if you have something that you can contribute, please do. If you need something, let us know. And we're going to hear I Got Rhythm. I could say I've got rhythm, I just can't sing. So having rhythm is not enough. All right, our closing hymn is 118. This Little Light of Mine.
We sang this last week too, didn't we?
Did we?
Yeah.
We should be pretty good.
Yes, should be better at it then.
We did.
We did, yeah.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
You were here, yes.
Yes, we did.
Let it shine. I remember last week I talked a little bit about the water situation out in Arizona, actually all over the country and all over the world. But and I couldn't find my slides. I don't know what I screwed up. But anyway, I found the slide, and I wanted you to see at the top of that post there is a sign that says 1925. That was the height of the land, and that's where if you were standing in 1925, that's where your feet would be. It's right there. In 1955, and the reason that this ground is what they call subsidence. The ground in the Central Valley where all the vegetables, 90% or whatever, 80% of the vegetables and crops that we eat is grown in the Central Valley of California. They don't have enough water that they're pumping from the Colorado River, so they dig these giant deep wells and they spray water all over the place. The water is like filling in all the crevices and places in the underground. And as the water leaves, the ground slowly sinks down and all these little caves collapse into a flat section. So the ground basically just keeps sinking and sinking and sinking. 1955, if you were standing, that's where you'd be on the pole. This is 1977. More than the ground has subsided since 1925 when they started pumping in the wells more than 30 feet. The ground has sunk more than 30 feet. And you think, well, why don't people see that? It's because the bridges, the houses, everything goes right down along with it. It's getting lower and lower and lower. So, and that water is a finite supply. They pump somewhere near to 6 to 7 to 8 feet a year of the water level in that water table. You know how much is regenerated by rainfall and what goes back into the ground to fill it up again? An inch. 1 inch a year is added, 6 feet a year is taken out. And what you get into is what's going to happen. This is what's happening in Arizona and Tempe.
Tonight, a water crisis in Arizona, as thousands of residents are about to be left without water. The water war hitting those in the Rio Verde foothills, a small but fast-growing area just west of Scottsdale. 2 weeks ago, the city of Scottsdale stopped the transportation of water, making good on a year's worth of warnings that the municipal water supply was running dry. About 500 homes, including some mid-construction, now counting down the days until their water runs out.
Because their livelihood. It's now, we need water now, we can't wait.
Last week, Rio Verde residents taking their fight from the steps of City Hall to the first meeting of the year for the Scottsdale City Council.
It's not too late to do the right thing. Within a matter of days, our water tanks at our homes will be dry. But this is affordable. We just need Scottsdale to process that water.
Scottsdale had been warning residents that the supply of water brought in by tankers could be cut off, noting developers of Rio Verde bypassed a state law, which on the books would have required them to prove a guaranteed supply of water for the next 100 years. But the supply of water in the greater area continues to drop. A decades-long drought, depleted groundwater sources, and reservoirs at record lows, leaving Rio Verde foothills an unincorporated town without its own supply of water, high and dry. Rio Verde residents filed a lawsuit against Scottsdale last week, saying the city violates state law and must resume providing domestic water services to the town. Now only days away from being left out to dry, residents are doing what they can to conserve the little water they have left.
I just cannot believe that a group of people would look at their neighbors and say, we're going to slowly kill off your community.
All right, Vaughn Hillier joins us now in the studio. So, Vaughn, we know that the municipal water supply is cut. Is the city doing anything to help these families? Right, that's where now the city and these residents are looking outside of Scottsdale. But that is where the hard truths about the cost of the water come in. All of this ultimately factors into the cost of the water for these residents. You're talking about these tanks, these water tankers, having to drive even further out to other cities, and that adds cost because the transportation to bring it back. And it's not just about this particular community, but it's also about the future ones. You know, you're talking about the housing demand in the Phoenix area right now, and a new project just broke ground 3 months ago to build 100,000 new homes. Well, the governor just released a report just this week saying that there's an inadequate water supply over the decades ahead to sustain that future development. So it's not just about the future, but it's about the current residents here of Arizona and whether there is water to truly sustain the greater Phoenix area. Yeah, well, I want to go back to something in your report, and you're from Arizona. That's one of the reasons why I want you to do the story. I don't know if this is normal, but how did that development even get built if they weren't sure there's going to be enough water?
Right, they bypassed a state law that is on the book saying that you have to prove that you have a 100-year water supply. And the developers of that new project that I'm talking about, they also proved it. But what they're coming to realize is that the reservoirs, as they continue to go down, groundwater continues to be depleted largely because of the demand from agriculture, is that the water that they thought is available is not there going forward into the future. And so that is where there's talks about moratorium on building into the future, but also should there be farming in the greater Phoenix area? Talking about more than 50% of water going to agriculture here. When you're looking at the landscape, it's just tough to try to sustain a city there in the middle of the Sonoran Desert.
Is this the problem that you remember growing up with, or is this something new?
This has become urgently more of concern. Growing up, we've always heard about water. You gotta turn off the faucet right after you finish washing your hands, when you're brushing your teeth, turn off the water there. But now you're talking about literally residents not being able to flush their toilets. This is something that I never experienced, but we were thinking it would be decades away. We're talking about this all happening right now.
This is
Thanks
happening
for watching our YouTube.
right now. And did you get the people from Rio Verde? We deserve the water. They built your community, and they truck their water in. They all have buried tanks, and the big tanker comes, but it comes at a subsidized price from the city of Scottsdale. The city of Scottsdale doesn't have enough water for their own people, and they're not going to give it to Rio Verde. Did they say they couldn't have water? No, they have to truck it from farther away, which means what? It costs more. And they're suing the city to say, we want subsidized water, we want cheap water. Everybody, there's not enough water to go around. The ground is sinking in California. They're running into the same thing in Arizona. What's going to be the big problem? Agriculture is getting 50% of the water to grow crops. And the same thing as Arizona grows lots of crops. Remember I told you before about we're subsidizing the Arab dairy herds because the farmers in Arizona are growing irrigated alfalfa, baling it up, and shipping it to Saudi Arabia. There's no reason for that to be going on. So all this has to be sorted out, but the people saying, oh, you can't shut our water off, that's not fair, that's not going to cut it anymore because there isn't enough water to go around. People are going to have to decide, they're going to have to use their intellectual faculties and decide what's the most important. And they're going to have to start really conserving water. I'm sure in the city of Rio Verde, you're going to find lawns that are being irrigated. That's just incredibly stupid in a time of shortage of water. But people don't seem to learn. You can tell them what's going to happen, but they don't do anything about it until it actually happens, and then many times it's too late. Okay, let's see. Extinguishing the Chalice, Go in Peace, Seeking Justice by Jim McGaw. When I say go in peace, I don't mean go in mindless oblivion. When I say go in peace, I don't mean go without challenging yourself or others. When I say go in peace, I don't mean go in utter ease and comfort. When I say go in peace, I mean go in peace seeking justice. I mean go in peace committed to equal rights and opportunities for all. When I say go in peace, I mean go in peace that is created when together We build communities of true solidarity, deep compassion, and fierce, unrelenting love. Go in peace and use your mental faculties to the betterment of all mankind, not just yourself. Okay, postlude is This Love of Mine. Okay, as you can see, I'm not ready for winter to end, so hopefully it'll get cold and we'll have a little bit more snow. I mean, it is only beginning February.
Still got February.
Yes, so we'll see. The forecast is for cold and rain, that's pretty discouraging. Before we go, we'll keep in our condolences to Margaret for her aunt, for Dolores, who passed after 99 and a half years. I hope everything went well there. And for the people in Ukraine, and let me throw in, I forgot to mention any joys and concerns. The New Carlisle Church is having some trouble with, there's a person in the church who's had some mental illness problems, and like any church, not like any church, I guess like a church we would want to be a part of, they're doing their best to support this person, but as you probably all know, it's really hard to support someone who doesn't know what end is up and right from wrong. It gets to be a really difficult struggle. So my prayers go with Pastor Tara, who is trying to do the right thing, and it's driving her crazy. All right, we have donuts and coffee, and did you guys bring coffee again? We have good coffee as well as instant coffee, so, and the donuts as usual. So that ends our service. Hopefully you'll be safe, and as I say every Sunday, the virus is still out there. Take your mask with you. If there's a lot of people, wear your mask.